Let's move on. We got the out file option here. Now, this option does not matter to us right now. It won't work right now. More interesting to us is outDir and rootDir. The bigger your project gets, the more you might want to organize your files. Typically, you don't just want to have your files lie around here in your root level project folder. Instead, what you often will see in projects is that you have a source folder and you have a dist folder next to next. So the dist folder has the job of holding all the output, so all the JavaScript files, let's say, and the source folder might hold all our TypeScript files. So we can move the TypeScript files into the source folder. And if I now delete the JavaScript folder, we have the problem that if we compile everything, these TypeScript files are compiled because TypeScript, the compiler, does look into subfolders, but the output sits next to our input files. And that's something we can control with the outDir, for example. If we set outDir, we can tell the TypeScript compiler where the created files should be stored. We could set this to dist. Now, if we do that, then if you run TSC, you will see that the JavaScript files indeed are not placed in the source folder, but in the dist folder. Now we just have to adjust our index.html file and there point at dist app.js and dist analytics.js, or alternatively move the index.html file into the dist folder, but then our dev server wouldn't work correctly anymore right now. So let's just adjust these imports. And with that, we got a working application still, as you see, but now with a cleaner project structure. Now, the good thing is, if we had a subfolder here, an analytics folder, let's say, and we had our TypeScript file in there, then if we recompile, and it does not matter if you do it with this command or in the watch mode, this folder structure you have in the source folder will also be replicated in the dist folder, which is of course very convenient because that makes sure that you can import the files basically as you would import them in the source folder as well, so that the structure you set up there is kept. Now you can also set the root directory and set this specifically at the folder where your files are stored in, like in this example source, to make sure that the TypeScript compiler does not look in other folders. That's also something you could do with the include option down there, right? But with root directory, the TypeScript compiler will not just look only at that source folder, it also makes sure that the project structure you set up there is kept in the dist folder. Now, it did so by default before, as you saw, but keep in mind that before it would have included any TypeScript files here, also outside of source. So, for example, if we comment this out temporarily, if we had a user folder here on the top level with a user TS file, where we have a username of Max, let's say, then if we compile this, you will also see that user folder in the dist folder. And now the source folder is included as well, because now we have a TypeScript file on a higher level, and therefore the TypeScript compiler thinks that our whole project again is the input, and it replicates the folder structure it finds there in the dist folder. Now that's of course not what we would want, and that's where the rootDir option helps us. Now if we set this to source, even if we had other folders with TypeScript files in there on the root level, they would not be included in the output, and the source folder itself would not suddenly end up there. So often you set both rootDir and outDir to be really clear regarding where your input files live and where your output files should be generated in. If we move on, we can ignore composite. We can have a look at remove comments. Should be pretty clear. If you set this, then any comments you might have in your TypeScript files will be removed in the compiled JavaScript files. So if I comment this in and I compile my code, you see in app.ts I have a comment, in app.js it's not there. So you can do that to make your files smaller, and therefore this might be a nice option. You can also set no emit if you don't want to generate any JavaScript files. Now this might sound strange because that's the idea of TypeScript, but if you just want to check whether your files are correct, but you don't want to write all these output files, to save some time, for example, in a bigger project, then you could set this to true to just have the TypeScript compiler check your files and report any potential errors without actually creating an output file. Import helpers is not really important to us here. We can ignore that. Down-level iteration is an advanced option. It is interesting when you compile your code to older versions of JavaScript and you work with for loops. Then in some rare scenarios, you could run into issues where the compilation doesn't work correctly. This option, if you turn it on, gives you a more exact compilation, which will work in these niche cases. So therefore, you might think you should always turn it on, but it will also output more verbose code. So you should only turn this on if you have loops and you see that your generated code suddenly behaves differently than it should regarding those loops.